They were only a month old, one tiny golden retriever puppy, starving, trembling, shoved out onto the cracking ice of a frozen lake. No mother, no shelter, no hope. It pawed desperately. The ice shattered, and it plunged into the freezing depths. Its faint, broken cries drifted across the empty shore, and no one came. No one, until he heard. Owen Parker, a man hollowed by loss, stood frozen as the sound reached his ears. What he did next, it shocked the entire town, and might just restore your faith in humanity. Before we begin, tell me, where are you watching from? Drop your country in the comments. And if you believe no soul should be left to freeze alone, hit that subscribe button, because this one will stay with you forever. The late afternoon sky over Lake Harriet was a pale steel gray, heavy with low-hanging clouds. Snowflakes fell in lazy, drifting spirals, soft at first, but soon thickening into a curtain of white that blurred the distant tree line. The lake stretched out, frozen over in a sheet of brittle ice, cracked and veined like a giant spider web. The wind howled sharply, rattling through the bare branches along the shore and sweeping icy tendrils across the lake's flat, featureless surface. The air smelled of frozen pine and distant chimney smoke, a bitter cold that bit into the bones. Near the center of the lake, something small and golden moved, a trembling, starved shape on four wobbly legs. A 1-month-old golden retriever puppy, no more than a handful of fluff and bones, stumbled weakly forward. Its golden fur, once fluffy, was now damp and clinging, darkened by melting snow. Tiny paws, raw and cracked, slipped and scrambled on the glassy surface. The puppy's ribs showed through its thin sides, each shaky breath sending a tiny puff of vapor into the freezing air. Its nose twitched, desperately sniffing for warmth, for food, for anything. A faint, broken yelp tore from its throat, a sound so weak it barely carried across the lake. Its large, dark eyes blinked, heavy with exhaustion and cold, and its floppy ears trembled as it took another uncertain step, then another. Then the ice beneath its paws groaned. The crack widened under its tiny weight, snaking outward like a pale, jagged scar. With a sudden, sharp crack, the ice gave way, and the puppy plunged into the freezing water with a splash no one heard. Or so it seemed. On the far shore, seated on an overturned bucket, was Owen Parker. He was a man shaped by the brutal chiseling of grief. 46 years old, tall and lean, with weathered hands, strong shoulders, and a face that had once been kind, but now carried deep-set lines of sorrow. His dark blonde hair was flecked with gray at the temples, and a short, neat beard framed his angular jaw. His eyes, a pale, almost washed-out blue, stared out over the ice with a hollow focus, one hand loosely holding his fishing rod, the other resting on his knee. Owen had once been a man of laughter, a man of family. Years ago, he had been the father with a little girl, Emily, who had adored the lake in all seasons. But that was before the accident, the day she ran out too far onto thin ice and fell through. The day Owen had sprinted across the cracking surface only to watch her disappear before he could reach her. That moment had carved something out of him, leaving him empty, leaving him estranged from his wife, leaving him here, years later, fishing alone on a lake that never let him forget. A sudden, faint noise tugged at his awareness. Owen stiffened, head snapping up. There it was again. A weak, desperate yelp, barely audible over the moaning wind. He rose slowly, scanning the snow-blurred lake, heart beginning to thump. And then he saw it. A flicker of movement near a jagged hole in the ice, no more than a pinprick of golden fur against the endless white. His breath caught. Without thinking, Owen tossed his rod aside and sprinted to the edge of the lake. His boots crunched over the packed snow as he ran, arms pumping, coat flaring behind him. His heart pounded painfully in his chest, each beat colliding with memories he had tried so hard to bury. He reached the ice's edge and slid onto it, his heavy work boots immediately slipping. Dropping to his knees, he crawled forward, teeth gritted, eyes locked on the tiny shapes still thrashing weakly in the water. "Hold on," he muttered hoarsely, his voice cracked from disuse. The puppy's tiny ears barely poked above the icy water. Its paws scrabbled desperately at the slippery edges, nails scraping helplessly on the ice. Its eyes rolled in panic, mouth open in silent, choked gasps. Owen could feel the ice groaning under his own weight as he inched forward, spreading his body out to distribute it. Crack! A thin fracture split outward under his elbow. Owen froze, his breath turning ragged. A wave of sick fear rose up inside him, not for himself, but for the tiny, desperate life flailing in front of him. His vision blurred briefly, flashing with a memory of Emily's small hand vanishing beneath dark water. He clenched his jaw, shaking it off. Not this time. He stretched forward, the ice whining and flexing beneath his chest. Inches away. The puppy's movements were slowing, its tiny body exhausted, sinking lower. "Come on, little one, come on," Owen whispered, his breath fogging the ice. With a sudden lunge, he thrust his arm out, plunging it into the frigid water. His fingers closed on soaked fur. The puppy let out a faint, strangled whimper as Owen gripped it, hauling its tiny, trembling form up onto the ice. He rolled onto his back immediately, clutching the puppy to his chest, heart hammering in his ears. The ice crackled beneath him, threatening to break again, but somehow, miraculously, it held. Owen lay there for a moment, gasping, his coat rapidly soaking through with melted snow, the puppy shivering violently in his arms. Its tiny heart thudded against his chest, fast and frantic, as if racing death itself. He could feel the sharp jut of its bones beneath the wet fur, feel the cold that had seeped deep into its tiny body. With a grunt, Owen forced himself to his feet, staggering back toward the shore. Snow swirled around him in thick gusts, stinging his face and eyes, but he barely noticed. All he could feel was the weight of the puppy in his arms and the raw surge of determination pounding through his veins. He reached the shore, knees buckling, and half fell onto the packed snow. The puppy whimpered softly, eyes barely open, its breath shallow. Owen crouched over it, his large, rough hands trembling as he cradled the fragile life in his arms. "You're okay now," he whispered, his voice hoarse with something between relief and heartache. "I've got you." The wind howled across the lake, rattling the bare trees and sweeping snow in icy spirals. Owen sat there, holding the tiny, shivering body close, feeling its weak heartbeat against his chest. His own heart, bruised and battered for so long, clenched painfully, and then quietly cracked open. For the first time in years, Owen Parker felt something stir inside him. And far across the frozen lake, the snow kept falling, silent and unrelenting, as if erasing the tracks of what had just happened, leaving only the man and the puppy, two battered souls clinging to each other beneath the shattering ice. The wind battered Owen Parker's back as he trudged through the knee-deep snow, cradling the tiny, soaking puppy against his chest. The little creature barely stirred, its tiny body shivering uncontrollably, its head pressed weakly into the curve of Owen's arm. His coat, already damp from the rescue, flapped heavily with each determined step as he pushed through the darkened trail leading to his small cabin, tucked at the edge of the woods near Lake Harriet. The cabin came into view, a weathered, one-story structure with faded green shutters and a sagging roof half buried under snow. Smoke no longer drifted from the chimney. Owen had let the fire die out before heading to the lake, expecting nothing but solitude upon return. The front porch groaned under his weight as he ascended, his breath visible in harsh white clouds as he fumbled with the key, balancing the fragile pup carefully. Inside, the air was bitterly cold. Owen kicked the door shut behind him, cursing softly under his breath. He set the puppy gently on an old wool blanket by the dormant fireplace. His hands, rough and red from cold, trembled slightly as he worked to strike a match, lighting the kindling he had left stacked for evenings like this. The fire sputtered to life slowly, casting flickering shadows across the room. It was a small Spartan space, just a narrow couch with sagging cushions, a battered coffee table scarred with rings from old mugs, and shelves dotted with framed photos turned face down. The walls were paneled with dark wood, scratched and dulled by time, and a faint scent of pine and worn leather hung in the air. Owen knelt beside the puppy, peeling away the frozen clumps of snow tangled in its golden fur. The puppy gave a faint whimper, eyes fluttering open for the first time since the rescue. Its eyes were large and dark, filled with a dazed kind of panic, and its tiny pink tongue poked out as it gave a weak, raspy pant. "You're okay, little one," Owen murmured, voice low, rough like gravel. His fingers worked with surprising gentleness, rubbing the small body with an old towel, trying to coax some warmth back into it. "You're safe now. No more ice, no more cold. He sat back briefly, running a hand over his face, feeling the prickle of his short beard. His jaw tightened as his eyes flicked toward the darkened photos on the shelves. One, turned slightly, showed a laughing little girl with blonde hair and missing front teeth, her arms wrapped around the neck of a golden retriever. Emily. His chest clenched sharply, and he forced his eyes away. Owen rose stiffly, rummaging through the battered first aid kit he hadn't touched in years. Bandages, antiseptic wipes, a cracked thermometer. He brought them to the fireside, carefully checking the puppy's tiny paws, which were raw and scraped. One back paw was slightly swollen, and Owen winced as the pup gave a soft yip when he touched it. "Sorry, little guy," he murmured. "Hang in there, okay?" Outside, the snow continued to fall, tapping faintly against the window panes. The room began to warm slowly, the fire casting a faint glow over the walls. Owen sat cross-legged on the floor, the puppy cradled in a blanket across his lap. He felt its tiny heartbeat fluttering fast beneath his fingers, as if the little thing couldn't decide whether to keep fighting or let go. "You're a tough one," Owen said softly, staring into the fire. His voice dropped, becoming more of a whisper. "I couldn't save her, you know." His eyes clouded, his throat tightening painfully. "My Emily? She loved this lake. She ran out too far. I ran after her." His hands trembled slightly as the memories surged up, cold and sharp as the winter wind. He saw it again, like a cruel echo. The cracked ice, the scream, the way her small hand reached toward him, then slipped under with a rush of dark water. His fists clenched, his jaw tightened, and he forced himself to breathe slowly. This wasn't then. This time, he had reached in time. The puppy gave another weak whimper, stirring slightly in his lap. Owen's gaze softened, and he leaned down, brushing a hand gently over its damp head. "Not this time," he whispered. "You're not slipping away." A sudden knock at the door made him flinch slightly. He wasn't expecting anyone. He rose cautiously, cradling the puppy, and opened the door to reveal a figure bundled in a heavy blue parka, snowflakes clinging to the hood. Sarah Jensen, his nearest neighbor, stood on the porch. Sarah was in her early 40s, tall and slender with sharp, angular features softened only slightly by her warm brown eyes. Her dark hair, usually neatly tied back, peeked from under her hood in damp, wind-blown curls. She was a practical, no-nonsense woman, known in the neighborhood for her quick wit and sharp tongue, but also for her quiet kindness. "I saw the light on," she said, concern flickering in her voice. "You're okay? I thought you said you weren't going out today." Owen nodded silently, stepping back to let her in. Sarah's sharp gaze fell immediately on the tiny bundle in his arms. "Oh, Owen," she breathed, her expression softening as she pulled back her hood, revealing pale cheeks flushed from the cold. "Where did you find that poor thing?" "On the lake," Owen rasped. "It fell through the ice. His voice cracked slightly, and he swallowed hard. "I pulled it out." Sarah stepped closer, her brow furrowed. She reached out carefully, fingers brushing the puppy's trembling flank. "It's freezing," she murmured. "You've got to get it warm, fast. Do you have formula? Blankets?" Owen shook his head, a faint, bitter smile touching his lips. "Just me," he murmured, "and an old fireplace." Sarah gave a short, determined nod. "I'll bring over some supplies." She touched Owen's arm briefly, a gesture filled with quiet understanding. "Hang on, okay? We'll help it together." As Sarah disappeared into the storm, Owen sank back down by the fire, cradling the tiny, trembling life in his arms. Outside, the wind howled and rattled the windows, but inside, for the first time in a long while, there was a flicker of warmth that reached beyond the fire's glow, a fragile, tentative hope wrapped in golden fur and the promise of a second chance. Morning light crept slowly across the frost-covered windows of Owen Parker's cabin. The fire had burned low during the night, casting only the faintest warmth into the room, but it was enough. Owen stirred on the couch, blankets tangled around his legs, one hand resting protectively on the small golden bundle nestled against his chest. The puppy's tiny body was warmer now, its soft fur slightly fluffier where it had dried, though its bony ribs still pressed too visibly beneath the thin skin. Owen opened his eyes slowly, blinking away the haze of sleep, and felt the tiny heartbeat pulsing against his side. As he sat up carefully, the puppy gave a faint yawn, its pink tongue curling adorably before it let out a soft, raspy whimper. Owen smiled, just a small, fleeting curve of his mouth. He gently set the puppy on the blanket by the fireplace and stretched, feeling the stiffness in his back and shoulders. When his gaze fell on the puppy again, he noticed something he hadn't seen in the chaos of the night before: a thin red collar circling its tiny neck. Leaning in, Owen squinted, brushing aside the tangled fur. The collar was frayed and worn, the small silver buckle scratched and dulled. Hanging from the collar was a tiny metal tag, its edges dented, the engraved numbers barely visible under layers of grime. His brow furrowed, Owen fetched his reading glasses from the shelf, dusty from disuse, and carefully wiped the tag clean with the corner of his shirt. A phone number, but part of it was smudged, the final 2 digits almost unreadable. Owen's fingers hovered over his old cell phone, heart pounding slightly. Maybe there was someone out there searching for this little creature, someone who had been desperate for its return. Or maybe there was no one at all. He dialed the number carefully, guessing the missing digits. The line rang once, twice, 3 times. No answer. He tried again, adding a different combination. Still no answer. A sinking feeling settled in his gut, but curiosity and a flicker of stubbornness pushed him to try one last time. Nothing. Letting out a slow breath, Owen rubbed a hand over his face, feeling the bristle of his beard. "Guess we're on our own for now, little guy," he murmured, glancing down at the puppy, who had curled up again near the fire, eyes fluttering open briefly before sinking back into exhausted sleep. Determined, Owen bundled up in his heavy winter coat. The dark blue fabric faded along the seams, and carefully lifted the puppy into a small padded box lined with towels. He set the box on the passenger seat of his aging pickup truck, a rusted-out Ford with a cracked windshield, and drove slowly into town. Minneapolis was still cloaked in morning snow, the streets dusted white, the storefronts blinking softly to life. He parked outside a small pet supply shop, its cheerful green sign reading, "Lisa's Pet Haven." A tiny bell jingled as he stepped inside, the warmth of the shop wrapping around him like a blanket. Behind the counter, a woman with sharp brown eyes and shoulder-length chestnut hair, tied in a loose braid, looked up. She was around 32, slender but strong, with a confident, no-nonsense air about her. Her name tag read Lisa, and as she noticed Owen entering with the box, her expression shifted from polite welcome to genuine concern. "Morning," Owen greeted quietly, lifting the box onto the counter. "I found this little one on the lake yesterday. Thought maybe you could help me figure out where it came from." Lisa stepped closer, her brow creasing as she leaned over the box. "Oh, poor baby," she murmured softly, reaching in carefully to stroke the puppy's small head. "Look how thin it is. Probably hasn't eaten properly in days." She glanced up at Owen. "You said you found it on the lake?" Owen nodded, folding his arms across his chest. "Fell through the ice. Almost didn't make it." Lisa gently lifted one of the puppy's front paws, frowning slightly at the raw, scraped pads. "Looks like it's been wandering a while. You said it had a red collar?" He handed her the tag, and Lisa squinted at it, turning it over in her hands. A flicker of something sharp crossed her expression. "I've seen this style of collar before," she said slowly, tapping her finger on the worn buckle. "Actually, we've had a few people come in lately asking about missing golden retriever puppies. All about this age, all gone without a trace." Owen felt a chill crawl up his spine, though the store's warmth had nothing to do with it. "You think they're connected?" Lisa's lips pressed into a thin line. "There's been talk around town. Some folks think there's a group moving through the area, picking up purebred puppies, for illegal sales, maybe even fights." She shook her head sharply, anger flickering in her eyes. "Scum like that. They don't care if the puppies survive or not." Owen's fists clenched at his sides. A dark knot of anger twisted in his gut, mixed with a raw, protective surge he hadn't felt in years. He looked down at the puppy, whose tiny head rested limply on the towel, its eyes half closed. "I don't know if I can track them down," Owen murmured quietly, "but I'm not letting this one go back to that kind of life." Lisa met his gaze, her expression softening just a little. "I can ask around," she offered. "Talk to a few of the rescue groups I know, see if anyone else has leads. In the meantime, take care of this little one. It's going to need a lot of rest and good food." Owen gave a small, grateful nod. He wasn't used to people helping him anymore. Most of the town had given up on the man who had once been so vibrant, but had retreated after tragedy into a life of isolation. Yet here was Lisa, offering something without asking anything back. As he carried the puppy back to his truck, Owen felt something shift slightly in his chest. Not a lightness, exactly, but a crack in the weight that had pressed down on him for so long. Maybe, just maybe, saving this puppy wasn't only about the puppy. Maybe it was also about saving himself. Snow crunched under Owen Parker's boots as he walked beside Lisa, through the narrow back streets of the outskirts. The sun was a pale, weak disk hanging low in the sky, barely cutting through the heavy cloud cover. Owen's coat was zipped tight against the cold, his breath puffing in little clouds as he clutched the small puppy, now wrapped snugly in an old fleece jacket, against his chest. The pup's dark eyes blinked up at him, its head peeking out just enough to feel the cold wind, its little body no longer shaking quite so violently as the day before. Lisa moved ahead with purposeful strides, her dark brown braids swinging across the back of her navy parka. She was sharp-eyed and brisk, a woman used to getting things done. There was no small talk between them as they made their way toward the old garage she had heard about, a crumbling building at the edge of the industrial district, long abandoned by any legitimate business but rumored to house illegal activities after dark. "I checked with the local rescues last night," Lisa said over her shoulder, her voice low and urgent. 3 reports of missing golden retriever puppies in the last month. No one knows where they're going. Owen adjusted his grip on the puppy, whose tiny paws twitched occasionally, as if dreaming. A faint protective smile tugged at the corners of his mouth. A strange thing to feel after so many years of grief, but undeniable. He had spent the night after returning from Lisa's shop watching the pup, watching Scout, as he had found himself calling it. The name had come to him suddenly, a memory of the stories Emily had loved as a child, tales of brave animals who went on adventures and saved the day. "Scout," Owen murmured now, glancing down at the small golden face. The puppy gave a soft, questioning yip, its tiny nose twitching. It had started wobbling around the living room earlier that morning, still weak but stubborn, determined to stand and follow Owen's every step. The sight had made Owen laugh, a rusty surprise sound he hadn't heard from himself in years. Lisa stopped suddenly, holding up a hand. Ahead, the garage loomed, its metal siding rusted, windows boarded up, a faded "for sale" sign hanging crookedly by a chain. Owen's eyes narrowed, tension knotting in his chest. "Let's check the perimeter," Lisa said quietly. "See if we can spot anything before going to the police." They circled the building carefully, snow crunching underfoot, broken bottles littered the ground, and old tire tracks led around to the back, where a wide roll-up door stood half open, a heavy padlock dangling uselessly from the side. Lisa crouched near a set of paw prints in the snow, small, delicate, unmistakably canine. "Recently," she murmured, brushing her fingers along the edge of the prints, "not more than a day or 2. Owen felt his jaw clench. He wanted to burst in, to tear the place apart. But years of loss had taught him a bitter kind of patience. He exhaled slowly, the cold air burning his throat. They decided to take their findings to the police, driving in silence to the small station on Main Street. The building was squat and brick, its windows covered with condensation. Inside, the front desk officer directed them back to the office of Sheriff Sam Whitaker. Sheriff Sam was a broad-shouldered man in his early 50s, his graying black hair cut close to his scalp. His face was square and blunt, with a thick mustache that hid most of his mouth, and deep-set brown eyes that carried the look of a man perpetually unimpressed. Sam had been sheriff of the town for nearly 2 decades, known for his rigid adherence to procedure and his gruff, no-nonsense manner. Once, long ago, he and Owen had shared beers at community picnics and waved across soccer fields when their kids played together. But after Emily's death, Owen had withdrawn, and Sam's sympathy had quietly turned to distant skepticism. Owen watched Sam now, as the sheriff leaned back in his chair, thick arms crossed, listening with an expression of polite disbelief. "You're telling me you 2 found a garage with some dog tracks?" Sam said slowly. "And you think it's connected to some kind of illegal puppy ring?" Lisa's sharp eyes flashed. "I know what I'm talking about, Sam. I've seen this before. Out-of-town groups moving through, snatching up purebreds to sell or worse." Sam sighed, running a hand through his graying hair. Look, Lisa, Owen, I'm not saying you're wrong, but I can't send my officers breaking into a building based on footprints and rumors. I need more, something concrete. Owen felt frustration bristle under his skin, but he held it back. He had learned, painfully, that anger didn't change much. He shifted his arm slightly as Scout squirmed softly, its small nose pressing into his jacket. Fine, Lisa said curtly, rising from her chair. But if something happens to those animals, Sam, you'll wish you'd acted sooner. Outside the station, the wind had picked up, flinging snow sideways through the streets. Lisa exhaled sharply, rubbing her gloved hands together. I'm going to keep digging, she muttered. I'll ask some of the rescue folks to help me watch that garage. Owen nodded quietly, glancing down at Scout. The puppy's eyes blinked sleepily, one small paw reaching out to press against his chest. Owen felt his heart twist in his chest, not with pain, but with something softer, something like the first hint of thaw in a long winter. Come on, Scout, Owen murmured, brushing a rough hand gently over the puppy's soft head. Let's get you home. That night, as the wind howled outside the cabin, Owen sat on the floor by the fireplace, watching Scout hobble carefully across the worn rug, its tiny legs unsteady but determined. Every time Owen moved, the puppy turned, following with wide, curious eyes. Owen let out a quiet chuckle, shaking his head in disbelief at himself. It had been years since he had let himself care about anything, since the night Emily's laughter had vanished beneath the ice. But now, here was this little life, refusing to give up, refusing to be left behind. And for the first time in a long time, Owen found himself wanting to fight again, not just for Scout, but for himself. The winter dusk fell quickly, stretching long shadows across the crumbling industrial blocks on the edge of town. Owen Parker crouched behind the rusted frame of an old pickup, his breath forming pale clouds in the icy air. Beside him, Lisa peered through a pair of binoculars, her brown eyes narrowed, lips pressed tightly together. Scout, the tiny golden puppy, wasn't with them. Owen had left him safely at Sarah's house, the sharp-witted neighbor who had quietly offered to help after noticing Owen's sudden anxious visits to town. They had been watching the old garage for nearly an hour, tucked in the back corner of the industrial district, its siding dented and its windows broken. But now, at last, movement stirred. A tall man stepped out of the garage's side door, his figure backlit by the pale yellow glow spilling from inside. Jackson. Owen's fists clenched at the sight. The man was around 40, tall and wiry, with jet-black hair slicked back, sharp cheekbones, and a thin-lipped mouth that carried a perpetual smirk. His eyes were cold, cutting, a pale gray so light they almost appeared silver. A dark leather jacket clung to his lean frame, and his long fingers flicked casually at a cigarette as he surveyed the street. Lisa hissed under her breath. That's him, Jackson Mertz, arrested twice on illegal animal trade charges, never convicted, slipped through the cracks both times. Owen's jaw tightened, his breath sharp and uneven. He remembered the first time he'd heard Jackson's name, years ago, when Emily was still alive, and they'd attended a town meeting about rising thefts in the county. Back then, Jackson had been just a whisper of trouble. Now, he was the shadow looming over everything Owen cared about. They watched as Jackson barked something to a pair of men inside the garage, then turned on his heel and strode off into the night, his boots crunching over the snow-dusted asphalt. Lisa exhaled slowly, lowering the binoculars. He knows what he's doing, she murmured. He's careful. Owen felt his stomach twist. Not careful enough, he muttered. But as they slipped back to their cars, Owen couldn't shake the feeling of eyes on his back. The feeling followed him all the way home, clinging to his shoulders like a cold, wet cloak. That night, Owen pulled into his driveway and sat for a long moment behind the wheel, the truck's engine ticking softly as it cooled. His cabin stood in silent darkness ahead, the porch light casting a weak circle onto the snow-covered steps. For the first time, the sight of home didn't comfort him. With a sinking heart, he climbed out of the truck, boots crunching softly on the hardened snow. He reached the door, slipped the key into the lock, and froze. The door was slightly ajar. Owen's chest tightened painfully. Slowly, cautiously, he pushed the door open, stepping inside. The room was dark, the fire dead in the hearth, and a cold draft stirred the curtains. Owen's hand tightened around the flashlight clipped to his belt as he swept the beam slowly across the room. Then, from beneath the table, a faint, terrified whimper. "Scout?" Owen whispered. The puppy emerged slowly, its little body trembling violently, ears flattened back, tail tucked. Owen's heart cracked at the sight. He crouched quickly, gathering Scout into his arms, feeling the pup's tiny heartbeat hammering in terror. He stood slowly, scanning the room. Nothing seemed obviously missing, but the air felt wrong, thick with the residue of someone else's presence. His fists clenched as a low, bitter anger curled in his chest. Someone had been here. Jackson. Owen set Scout down gently on the couch, then moved through the house, locking windows, double-checking doors, pulling the heavy wooden bar across the front entrance. He was done letting the past swallow him whole, done letting loss dictate his every move. No more. He stood in the center of the room, fists clenched, heart pounding, staring at the fireless hearth. The anger surged up inside him, bitter and hot, wrapping around the protective edge he felt for the tiny creature now shivering on his blanket. He had already lost too much. He wasn't losing Scout. The next morning, Lisa came by, her face pale under her wool hat. "You okay?" she asked sharply the moment Owen opened the door. "You look like you didn't sleep at all." Owen shook his head, his jaw set. "He was here," he said quietly, "in the house." Lisa sucked in a sharp breath, eyes darkening. "We need to move fast," she murmured. "I've got a contact, someone from the Regional Animal Welfare Group. They've been tracking Jackson's operations across the state. We can send them the garage info, the timeline, everything." Owen nodded tightly, glancing over at Scout, who was nestled safely in the crook of the couch, tiny eyes blinking up at him. The puppy had eaten a little this morning, wobbling around the living room on unsteady legs, tail wagging hesitantly. It followed Owen's every step now, its small paws tapping softly across the floor. A faint smile tugged at the corner of Owen's mouth as he knelt beside the puppy, ruffling the soft golden fur. "You're tougher than you look, Scout," he murmured. Lisa watched him quietly for a moment, then placed a hand lightly on his shoulder. "We'll get him, Owen, I promise." That night, as the snow fell softly outside the window, Owen sat by the fire, Scout curled up against his leg, tiny paws tucked under its chin. He felt the old walls of his heart shifting, cracking open just enough to let in something warm, something alive. And as the fire crackled softly, Owen knew one thing for certain. He wasn't backing down. Not this time. Wind roared like a beast outside Owen Parker's cabin, hurling snow sideways through the dark. It was the worst storm of the winter yet. Blizzard warnings had flashed on every weather station, and the town's streets were now swallowed in white. But it wasn't the storm that kept Owen awake. It was the silence beneath it, the kind of silence that pressed against the windows like a warning. Owen sat in the living room, muscles tense, a heavy oak chair wedged beneath the front doorknob. A crowbar and a splintered baseball bat leaned against the wall beside him. The fire had been doused. No smoke to signal anyone was home. All the lights were off except for a small lamp in the hallway, casting just enough glow to see the outline of Scout curled in a nest of blankets tucked inside the bedroom. The pup had protested being separated, letting out low, anxious whines, but Owen had whispered softly to him, calming him with a firm hand and quiet words. "You stay put, boy," he'd said, kneeling beside the little dog, "no matter what you hear." Scout was still thin, still limping from his healing paw, but his spirit had outgrown his tiny frame. Lately, he followed Owen everywhere, even to the shed and back, tail wagging low but constant. At 1:43 a.m., the silence snapped. A dull thud echoed at the back of the house. Then another, louder this time. Owen rose silently, gripping the crowbar. His breath came slowly, evenly, despite the pulse hammering in his ears. He moved toward the kitchen, stepped silent, pressing his back to the wall beside the rear door. Then the glass shattered. A booted foot slammed through the pane, followed by a gloved hand unlocking the latch from the inside. The door creaked open. A dark figure slipped in. A man in a snow-drenched jacket, face wrapped in a scarf. He moved quickly, scanning the room with a flashlight. Owen didn't hesitate. He swung the crowbar with both hands, striking the man's shoulder with a sickening crack. The intruder let out a cry, stumbling back, crashing into the counter. But there were more boots now, 2 more sets, moving fast from the front. He turned just as the front door burst open, chair tumbling to the floor. Snow howled through the entryway. Jackson stood in the doorway, taller and colder than Owen remembered, eyes gleaming like polished steel under the storm's glow. Behind him was another man, stocky and heavy-set, his breath fogging the air like steam from a furnace. "Well, well," Jackson drawled, stepping inside. "Didn't think you'd be so ready, Parker." "You made it personal," Owen growled, his grip tightening around the crowbar. Jackson chuckled, tilting his head. "That pup doesn't belong to you. You're in way over your head." Behind him, the stocky man advanced. Owen swung again, blocking the man's lunge. A table was overturned. Wood splintered. Fists flew. Owen fought like a man with nothing left to lose, until he remembered he did. He had Scout. A bark rang out. Not weak, not hesitant, fierce. From the hallway, Scout came bolting, still limping, but fast and determined. His fur bristled, and his tiny teeth bared in a snarl. He darted forward and clamped down hard on Jackson's leg. "Get it off!" Jackson roared, trying to shake the puppy free. Owen surged forward, adrenaline exploding in his veins. He rammed Jackson into the wall, the crowbar against the man's throat. Jackson gasped, clawing at Owen's arms. But then the stocky man grabbed Owen from behind, yanking him off. They crashed to the ground. Owen hit his head hard on the floorboards, vision blurring. Pain screamed in his shoulder as the man pinned him. Jackson, now free, staggered forward, pulling a knife from his coat. "Should have stayed out of it," he spat. But before the blade could fall, red and blue lights flooded the cabin. "Police! Don't move!" The room erupted in chaos. Lisa's voice cut through the storm. "Weapons down! Hands where I can see them!" 4 officers in heavy tactical gear poured through the doorway. The stocky man raised his hands, backing away. Jackson, cursing, was tackled to the ground. Scout backed into the corner, growling protectively, his tiny frame bristling. Owen blinked through the haze, struggling to sit. Lisa knelt beside him, her face drawn with worry, her cheeks red from the wind. "You all right?" she asked, helping him upright. "Been better," he rasped. The officers secured the intruders, and soon the living room was a battlefield of overturned furniture, glass shards, and police radios crackling with reports. One officer, a young man with sandy hair and steady hands, knelt beside Owen. "Name's Officer Brenner," he said. "We've been tracking Jackson's crew for weeks. Lisa's tip got us the warrant we needed. We've already raided the garage. It's a mess, but there are cages, puppies, evidence." Owen nodded weakly, cradling Scout, who now whimpered quietly in his arms. "It's over?" Brenner nodded. "It's over." Later, as the cabin slowly calmed and the police filtered out, Owen stood in the quiet aftermath, looking at the damage. Sarah appeared with a blanket and a mug of hot tea, her tall frame still tense with concern. "You're lucky," she murmured, "but you were brave." Owen glanced down at Scout. "He was braver than I was." Sarah smiled, touching his arm gently. "Maybe, but you gave him a reason to be." Owen knelt beside Scout, pressing his forehead to the puppy's warm fur. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. The storm outside was still raging, but inside, for once, the battle was over. The morning after the storm was unnaturally quiet, as if the whole world were holding its breath. Snow lay heavy on the trees, blanketing every branch and rooftop in pure white. The sky was clear for the first time in days, pale gold sunlight spilling across the icy ground, making the snow sparkle like scattered diamonds. A few sparrows flitted across the yard, their tiny wings stirring faint puffs of powder as they hopped along the porch railing. Inside Owen Parker's cabin, warmth seeped through the rooms again. The fire crackled softly, casting gentle light across the living room where Scout lay curled up in a nest of blankets. The puppy looked almost like a different creature from the weak, starved animal Owen had pulled from the ice days ago. His golden fur, now clean and soft, fluffed slightly where it dried after the bath Sarah and Lisa had insisted on giving him. A tiny knitted red sweater, gifted by Sarah, who turned out to be unexpectedly talented at making dog clothes, hugged his small body, the sleeves just loose enough for his wiggly paws. Owen sat on the couch, watching Scout sleep, his elbow resting on his knee, chin in his hand. His rough, weathered face was softer now, the edges of grief dulling slightly in the presence of the gentle, rhythmic rise and fall of Scout's tiny breaths. Across from him, Lisa leaned against the wall, her arms crossed loosely. Her dark brown braid hung over her shoulder, a soft smile tugging at her lips as she watched Owen. Her sharp, confident energy had softened over the last 24 hours, replaced by a quiet warmth. She hadn't left his side since the police took Jackson away the night before, checking on Scout, helping Owen clean the cabin, even sharing a laugh or two in the middle of exhaustion. Sarah arrived mid-morning, brushing snow off her tall frame as she stepped inside, her cheeks pink from the cold. She wore a thick wool coat over jeans, her salt and pepper hair tucked into a loose braid that trailed over one shoulder. Her sharp gray eyes swept the room quickly, settling on Scout. "Well, look at you," Sarah murmured, her voice warm and amused. She crouched beside the puppy, gently ruffling his ears. "Like nothing ever happened, huh?" Scout stirred, blinking up at her, tail giving a small, hopeful wag. Lisa grinned. "He's a fighter, that one." Owen rose slowly, rubbing a hand through his graying hair. He was still dressed in the flannel shirt and jeans he'd pulled on after the chaos of the night before, but he stood straighter now, his shoulders no longer slumped under invisible weight. "I guess I need to make it official," he said softly, looking down at Scout. "No more wondering where you belong." Sarah gave him a proud, approving look. "You're keeping him?" Owen nodded, a small, genuine smile touching the corners of his mouth. "Yeah, he's home now." Outside, the sunlight strengthened, glinting off the ice-coated branches, scattering light through the trees like prisms. Owen, Lisa, and Sarah stepped onto the porch, Scout bouncing along at Owen's feet. For the first time, the little dog darted ahead, sniffing at the snowbanks, giving tiny barks at the sparrows darting nearby, his red sweater a bright splash of color against the white. Owen crossed his arms loosely over his chest, watching Scout with a mixture of amusement and quiet awe. It had been so long since he'd let himself feel this lightness, this fragile, cautious hope. Beside him, Lisa tucked her hands into her coat pockets. "He's going to need a lot of training, you know," she said, a teasing edge in her voice. Owen chuckled, a low, rough sound. "Yeah, well, I guess I've got time." Sarah shot him a sideways glance, a smirk tugging at her lips. "Never thought I'd see the day, Owen Parker, dog owner." Owen shrugged, eyes still fixed on Scout as the puppy frolicked in the snow. "Never thought I'd want to." His voice dropped slightly, something vulnerable threading through. "But maybe it's time." A soft silence settled between the three of them as they watched Scout chase a snowflake, his tiny paws kicking up powder as he darted in happy circles. The sky stretched wide and pale above, the air crisp and fresh, the world washed clean by the storm. And for Owen, standing on the threshold of his home, there was a flicker of something he hadn't felt in years. Not the sharp, painful memory of what he had lost, but the soft, tentative sense of what he still had, and what might come next. The sun hung low over Lake Harriet, its golden rays casting long shadows across the snow-dusted shore. The air was crisp but gentle, the bite of winter softened by the promise of spring hiding just beneath the frozen surface. A year had passed since that night of chaos, and the world felt quietly transformed. Owen Parker walked slowly along the icy edge of the lake, his tall figure wrapped in a heavy dark green coat, his graying hair brushed back by the cold wind. His face, once so tightly locked in grief, was now looser. The lines around his eyes softened, his mouth no longer perpetually drawn into a thin, sorrowful line. He walked with the quiet ease of a man who had fought long battles, both inside and out, and emerged not untouched, but still standing. Beside him strolled Lisa, dressed in a navy winter coat and a knitted maroon hat, her chestnut hair tucked beneath it. She wore a faint, knowing smile as she watched the golden shape darting ahead across the snow. Lisa remained as sharp as ever, her energy unwavering, but there was something gentler in her now, too, something warmer when she spoke to Owen, when she stopped by the cabin, when she laughed softly at the little dog that had, against all odds, stolen both their hearts. Scout had grown into a magnificent young dog, still lean, still lively, but no longer the fragile, trembling puppy they had rescued. His golden coat gleamed under the sunlight, a deep, rich honey color, his tail a proud banner as he bounded through the snow, sending up sprays of sparkling powder with each joyful leap. His paws, once cracked and raw, were now strong, carrying him effortlessly across the uneven ground as he chased after snowflakes and darting sparrows, his tongue lolling happily from his mouth. Owen paused at the edge of the lake, pulling a small item from his coat pocket. It was a new collar, a deep forest green that matched his jacket with a polished silver tag. He crouched down, his knees creaking softly, and called, "Come here, boy!" Scout skidded to a halt, his ears perked, eyes bright. With a joyous bark, he bounded back, crashing playfully into Owen's arms. Owen laughed, a warm, full sound, and gently buckled the collar around Scout's neck, fingers brushing lightly over the engraved tag. Scout, if found, call Owen Parker. There you go, Owen murmured, pressing his forehead gently to the dog's. Now, everyone knows you've got a home. Lisa watched with a soft smile, crossing her arms loosely over her chest. You're a softie, you know that? She teased gently. Owen straightened, his lips quirking into a small wry grin. Yeah, he said softly, glancing at her. I think I've always been, just forgot how to show it. Together they walked further along the shore, their boots crunching in the thin snow. Birds chattered softly in the trees overhead, and the lake glistened under the setting sun, its icy surface catching every ray of light and scattering it like a mosaic of memory and promise. Back at the cabin, Owen had made changes over the year, not grand, but meaningful. The broken shutters had been fixed, the roof patched, the old sagging porch replaced with a sturdy new one. Inside, the walls no longer bore only shadows. They now held framed photos. Owen with Scout perched proudly at his side, Lisa laughing as Scout tried to steal her glove, Sarah standing tall with a rare, genuine smile, her silver-streaked hair loose in the wind. A photo of Emily remained on the mantel, but now it stood beside a newer frame. Owen, crouched in the snow, arms wrapped around a wriggling Scout, both faces glowing with unfiltered joy. Owen had not replaced his past, he had added to it. As the sun dipped lower, they paused one last time to watch Scout darting across the frozen lake's edge. Owen felt his chest tighten, not with grief, but with a fierce, tender kind of gratitude. He had found something he hadn't known he still needed, a reason to open the door again, to laugh again, to care again. A little golden retriever who had been left for dead and had instead breathed life back into the broken places inside him. He slipped his hands into his coat pockets, glancing sideways at Lisa. She smiled back, steady and calm, the kind of friend who didn't ask for more than you could give, but stayed anyway, quietly offering presents over promises. The world around them shimmered in the last light of the day, the lake glistening like a mirror to both past and future, the trees standing tall and bare against the pink and gold sky, the snow catching every hue in soft, glowing silence. Owen breathed deeply, feeling the cold air fill his lungs. And as Scout turned, bounding back toward him with uncontainable joy, Owen let a small, quiet smile tug at the corners of his mouth. Not everything could be healed, not every wound closed cleanly. But here, in this moment, under this sky, with this little soul hurtling toward him through the snow, Owen knew he had found something that mattered. He had found warmth again. This story is not just about rescuing a tiny, abandoned puppy on thin ice. It's about rescuing a man who had lost his way, whose heart was frozen by grief. A chance encounter between a fragile life and a broken human spirit became a quiet miracle, proving that hope can rise even in the coldest places, and that love can heal wounds we thought would never mend. Because sometimes, when we save a life, that life ends up saving us. If you believe every soul deserves a second chance, drop an amen in the comments. Tell us, where are you watching from? And if this story touched your heart, hit that subscribe button. Because stories like this remind us that even after deep loss, there's always a path back to love.